small mistake. I spelt compound wrong. Not that it's going to make any difference. But I can't talk and spell at the same time. That's too difficult. What I'm going to do now is, as I stated earlier, is that there is not always one right answer. I'm going to show you what that means and why an array is probably the better or the more effective way of dealing with numbers. Now, we use arrays a lot in managing and handling data. So I'm going to start a new program, and what I'm going to do is just cut this from here and put it in my new program. So I've got two programs running sort of side by side so you can compare them. So at the moment you should be able to see that I've got the numbers 1431121, 1431121 in my array and in my variables. So if I was to count up the number of ones, you can do this visually. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 there, and I've got 1, 2, 3 and 4 there. If I was to write a program to count these, that's where you're going to start seeing the difference between the two when we're using variables. So I'm going to start off with the variable version, and I'm going to count up the number of ones. And the way I have to do it, and I mean have to do it, I need to set a variable to begin with. Count equals 0. And I'm going to add 1 to this each time I find a 1 in one of these numbers. Now the problem with this is that I have to check each variable on its own in its own if statement. So if num1 is equal to 1, then what I'm going to do is add 1 to my count. Count equals count plus 1. And at the end of the day, what I'm going to do is print out the value of count. So let's save this. We'll call this 1. Making sure it's going to the right place. And let's save this as 2. Right, let's continue with this program. Let's run this program to begin with, just to make sure I've not made any mistakes. Run that, and there we go. I only counted one thing if number 1 equaled 1, which it does, so the count became 1. Now if I want to find out if any of these other variables contain the value 1, what I really need to do, and I'm very lazy so I'm going to copy and paste, I need to check each and every single one in turn. So this one would be num2, and this one will be num3, and this one will be num4, this one is num5, and num6 and 7. Let's just stick those in quickly. Num6, num7. Now we counted them before, so let's just put a little space there. We counted them before and we got 4 ones. So if I save this program and run it again, I'm expecting the value 4 to be printed out. There we go. There's 4. So it works, and it counts up each and every single one that each variable holds. I'm going to do the same thing now with my num array. I'm going to start off again with count equals 0. And then I'm going to set my num array up But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to loop through it because of the data type, because it's all in one in this num array and not in separate variables. I can just run through this array and count them up. So I can say for index in range, and I've got to say how many there were. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In range 7. If num array, don't worry about the coding at the moment, num array at index is equal to 1, and count equals count plus 1. And finally, I'm going to print the count. So already you can probably see that it's fewer lines. So if I save the program and run it, that should also print out 4. So actually I'm going to type in here so that you can see program 1, print program 1, whoops, I need speech marks, because you might not be able to distinguish between the two. Print program 2, save them both, let's run them again. Run module, there we go. So this is program 1, counts for 4, and if I run my second one, program 2 counts 4. So there's the first comparison. As you can see, very few lines. Both work. Both give me the right answer. Okay, it was 4. Both give me the right answer. However, there's a big difference in the amount of code between the two. And the next sort of difference is if I want to extend this, remember I talked earlier about 1,000, if I got 1,000. Well, I'm not going to go as far as that. Let's go up to 10. If I num8, if I increased the number of dice rolls that I did here, I've got to create the variable. So now there should be 6. But not only have I got to create the variable, I've also got to add in extra if statements. So I'm copying it and pasting it. One more. Okay, and if I wanted to do exactly the same thing with my other program, all I need to do is actually just put them in my array. In fact, I've got 2 things to do, but generally I'd only have 1 thing to do, and I'll come to that a little bit later on. So I had an extra 1, a 2, and a 1. And the extra thing that I've got to do is change that value to 10. But in reality, I wouldn't be doing this at all. I'd be calculating the length of that list and using that value, which I will talk about in a second once I've actually run through this program. So if I now run this program, it runs through, it says program 1, there are 6. And if I run the second program, not still program 1, silly me, run the second program. Okay, it says program 2, there are 6 ones. So the same program, or the same result, 2 different ways of doing it. Variables is going to give me a lot of problems. I'm going to be writing tons and tons of code to get through things. However, if I learn how to use arrays, then actually it becomes quite simple. Very few lines of code to achieve the same sort of thing. I'm going to go on to one last thing before I move on, and that was how many are in here. If I do this, print len for length, and then use the word num array. So what that's going to do when I run my program now, it's going to give me two numbers. It's going to give me the 6 from running all of this. And it's also going to tell me how long my array is there, which should be 10. So if I run that, so the first value I should see is 10. For 10 numbers, we're in program 2, and there are 6 ones. Now, that is called a built-in function, len. It works out the length. It can do it with strings, it can do it with arrays, it can do it with a variety of things. It's a really, really useful function. The thing is, I can actually just cut it from there, and instead of using the 10, which is called hard-coded, I can put in that function. We know at the moment that's going to work out to be 10, so let's get rid of that print. That's going to be 10, the length of my list, and it's going to count for 6. So let's run that. There we go, program 2, there are 6. Now, the beauty of this is using the length function instead of a number in my range is that it doesn't matter how many values I put in here. Put some more 1s, 4s. Can you imagine doing this by having to write variables and if statements in my other program? I'd be well off the screen now and probably tearing my hair out. But this should be able to count up how long this list is, and it should be able to tell me how long or how many items there are. And what I'm going to do is actually also print the length of the list. Is that on there? Yeah, there we go. So it's going to print the length of the list, and it's going to tell me how many ones are in there. Very little coding changes. So let me run that program. There we go. There's 23 items in my list. 11 of them were ones. Much simpler when we understand how to use these than assigning variables. Both programs are correct. It's just that one is a little bit more easy to play with at the end of the day. I know which one I prefer. Hopefully you will prefer the same one. So what we've done in this lesson is we've compared using variables to hold our values against a single array. We've looked at counting them up, and the fact that if we've used variables, we have to check each variable in turn and write an if statement for it. Whereas in our array, we just use the array and something called an index, which we will look at in the next video. And we also looked at the fact that if we've got an array, we can work out how many items are in that array. And in fact, another thing I want to teach you about is each item, as I've just explained, is actually called, wait for it, an element. So that's an element, that's an element, that's an element, that's an element, and so on. So on to the next lesson now. We're going to take a little bit more of a look at this array and what it can hold and what it can do.